Before the wall of ideology rose, there was only the river, the mountains, and the people. Imagine the Korean peninsula before it was a headline, before it was a scar. Rolling hills kissed by monsoon rains, rice paddies stretching like mirrors beneath the sky, and villages that spoke the same tongue from Pyongyang to Busan. For centuries, Korea was a united land, ruled by dynasties like Goryeo and Joseon, steeped in Confucian tradition. Its people lived by the rhythm of the seasons and the code of loyalty to family and land. But isolation could not withstand the storm of empires. In 1910, Japan annexed Korea, beginning 35 years of colonial rule. Schools taught Japanese, not Korean. Farmers lost their land to imperial landlords. Resistance movements whispered in the hills, plotting a future free from foreign chains. Among them, a young guerrilla fighter named Kim Il-sung emerged, his legend later to be polished into myth. By 1945, the world was aflame. Japan's defeat in World War II promised liberation for Korea, but also set the stage for its division. As Soviet forces moved into the north and Americans into the south, an arbitrary line was drawn across the 38th parallel. It was supposed to be temporary, but history rarely respects such intentions. Bridge. That invisible line, meant to last weeks, would instead harden into one of the most fortified borders on Earth, and a nation unlike any other. They promised unity, but delivered division. In 1948, the Korean peninsula was split, not just in territory, but in ideology. In the north, with Soviet backing, Kim Il-sung declared the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. In the south, Syngman Rhee took the presidency of the Republic of Korea. The Cold War had arrived in Asia, and Korea was its front line. Pyongyang became the center of a new state, one that drew heavily from Marxist-Leninist doctrine, but wrapped it in Korean nationalism. Land reforms confiscated estates and redistributed them to peasants. Factories and mines were nationalized, and at the top stood Kim Il-sung, the great leader, his portraits gazing down from every wall. The air was thick with slogans: self-reliance, revolution, eternal loyalty. Radio broadcasts spoke of unity under socialism, while border guards patrolled against the imperialist South. Inside the country, dissent vanished, along with those who voiced it. To the outside world, North Korea seemed like a peculiar experiment in totalitarianism. To those inside, it was becoming a sealed world, with its own calendar, its own truth. But this fragile new state would not be tested by ideology alone. Its survival would soon depend on war. One war. Two worlds torn apart forever. At dawn on June 25, 1950, North Korean troops crossed the 38th parallel in a sudden, thunderous assault. Pyongyang declared it a liberation campaign. The South called it an invasion. In 3 days, Seoul fell. The peninsula descended into one of the bloodiest wars of the 20th century. Imagine the camera pulling back, tanks grinding through ruined streets, refugees clogging the roads, the Yalu River shrouded in smoke. The United States and United Nations rushed to aid the South. China poured hundreds of thousands of troops into the North. For 3 years, the land became a battlefield of superpowers. By 1953, after millions of deaths and no clear victor, an armistice froze the front where it began, near the 38th parallel. No peace treaty followed. Instead, a demilitarized zone, laced with mines and barbed wire, cut Korea in two. The war left scars deeper than any border. Families were split for decades, cities reduced to ashes, trust annihilated. In the North, the war's destruction became the foundation for a siege mentality, justifying decades of militarization and isolation. Bridge. And as the rubble cleared, Kim Il-sung began crafting not just a nation, but a dynasty. In his story, every victory was his, every sacrifice the people's. Post-war North Korea was a country rebuilding at breakneck speed. With Soviet aid and Chinese support, Pyongyang rose from the ashes into a model socialist city. Wide boulevards, monumental statues, and a skyline designed to inspire awe. Industry expanded, education flourished, at least in state-approved forms. Kim Il-sung consolidated power with purges, eliminating rivals and ensuring loyalty through an intricate web of propaganda and surveillance. His image was everywhere, smiling in posters, cast in bronze, enshrined in the hearts of children, taught to revere him almost as a god. The ideology of Juche, self-reliance, became the state's creed. It was more than economics. It was a worldview, one that framed North Korea as a pure, besieged fortress in a corrupt world. Every hardship was reframed as a noble struggle against enemies. Yet beneath the pageantry, the system was tightening. Travel was restricted, information sealed, and fear embedded in everyday life. But the fortress would not remain untouched. The winds of history were about to change. When the world moved on, they dug in. The 1970s and 1980s brought global shifts. China opened to the West. The Soviet Union began reforms. South Korea industrialized into a modern powerhouse. But North Korea remained locked in its ideological bunker. Economically, the country stagnated. Without the Soviet subsidies and global trade networks that fueled other nations, Pyongyang's factories slowed. The gap between the two Koreas widened dramatically, not just in wealth, but in worldview. Internationally, North Korea's diplomacy was unpredictable, courting African and Middle Eastern states one day, threatening its neighbors the next. At home, propaganda kept the population convinced of their nation's superiority, even as food shortages began to creep in. Kim Il-sung aged into a near-mythical figure, his birthday becoming the nation's most important holiday. But change was coming, not from within, but from the collapse of his most vital ally. Bridge. The fall of the Soviet Union would push North Korea to the edge of survival. They called it the Arduous March, but it was a silent war against hunger. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, aid vanished almost overnight. Combined with poor harvests and floods, North Korea descended into one of the worst famines in modern history.
The government called it the Arduous March, invoking guerrilla hardships of the past. But this was no heroic struggle. It was mass starvation. Imagine empty markets, silent villages, people foraging for roots and bark. International aid trickled in, but distribution was uneven. Entire families perished. Estimates of deaths range into the hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions. Through it all, the regime maintained its grip, insisting that sacrifice was patriotic, that loyalty meant endurance. Kim Il-sung's death in 1994 passed leadership to his son, Kim Jong-il, cementing the world's only communist dynasty. Yet famine would not be the only challenge. Nuclear ambitions were about to bring North Korea back onto the world stage.
If we cannot match their wealth, we will command their fear. In the mid-1990s, North Korea's nuclear program became the focus of international tension. For Pyongyang, atomic weapons were the ultimate insurance policy, a deterrent against invasion, a bargaining chip for aid, and a symbol of strength. Negotiations with the United States produced the 1994 agreed framework, promising aid in exchange for halting nuclear development. But mistrust ran deep. Both sides accused the other of failing to uphold the deal. By the early 2000s, North Korea had withdrawn from the Non-Proliferation Treaty and resumed its nuclear work. Test after test shook the region. Each missile launch was a statement. North Korea would not be ignored. Sanctions tightened, yet the regime endured, feeding its people's pride as much as their hunger. Bridge. And as Kim Jong-il's health declined, the world watched for the next chapter in this dynasty's rule. Youth, power, and the shadow of a dynasty. In 2011, the death of Kim Jong-il brought his young, little-known son, Kim Jong-un, to power. Many doubted his ability to rule. They were wrong. Kim quickly consolidated control, eliminating rivals with ruthless efficiency. His image blended his grandfather's revolutionary legacy with a new style. Public appearances at amusement parks, missile tests broadcast like sporting events, and bold diplomatic gestures. Internationally, he was unpredictable, trading threats with U.S. presidents one year, shaking hands the next. At home, surveillance deepened, and the cult of personality reached new heights. Skyscrapers rose in Pyongyang, even as rural areas languished. But modernity could not pierce the nation's deepest barrier, the one built in the mind. To know the truth, you must first see beyond the curtain. Inside North Korea, life is shaped by the state at every turn. Education begins with songs praising the leaders. Work assignments are dictated by the government. Foreign media is forbidden. The internet for most citizens does not exist. Public spectacles, military parades, mass games, synchronized performances are carefully choreographed to project unity. Yet beneath the surface, small cracks appear. Black markets, whispered foreign songs, smuggled USB drives from China. Defectors describe both loyalty and quiet longing. For some, the idea of another life is unthinkable. For others, it is worth risking everything. And so, North Korea moves forward in defiance of the world and the passage of time. History here is not past, it is present, repeated each day. Today, North Korea remains one of the most isolated nations on Earth. Its nuclear arsenal continues to grow. Its borders remain shut to all but the most carefully chosen visitors. Its leader rules unchallenged. From a united ancient kingdom to a divided modern fortress, the story of North Korea is one of survival at a cost. Its people live in a place where history is not debated, but dictated, where the past is not remembered, but reenacted. And so the question remains, is this a nation frozen in time, or one preparing for a future the world has yet to imagine? Because in North Korea, the next chapter is always written behind closed doors.